How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I am AV Obsessed, and if you're watching this video, that means that you probably are too. And today, I am doing a review of the new Sony SSCS5 M2. So let's get these bad boys unboxed. Pretty standard brown cardboard box with some printing on them that says what they are. They've got that high-res logo printed all over the box, which is kind of funny to me because of the fact that it's Sony, and in my opinion, most of the time when products have that high-res printing on the box, it's usually like a gimmick. High-res audio is much more about the player than the speaker. Any speaker will play high-res audio. So right away, stuck to the outside of the box, there's this little label thingy here. You guys will have to forgive me, I don't have a camera person here today. And then right in the top, you've got just your standard hard, like single impact, and it's cracked kind of foam. And then, wow, these are not very deep speakers. One of the speakers here, it does have the nice styrofoam baggie or whatever you want to call it wrapped around them, so that's good. Tape shut at the bottom. So I'm gonna try to keep this looking as close to brand new as possible here. Okay. I'm very interested to see what these things sound like, because I never actually listened to the first generation of these. Another thing that's kind of interesting with the way these are packaged is the grills are already on the speakers, like while they're in the box. So here you get your first shot of the front of the speaker with the grill on, because that's apparently how they ship them. Not a very deep speaker, like I said. Actually, for being such a cheap speaker, it's a surprisingly well-built feeling cabinet. And actually not terrible feeling binding posts on the back. Nice big 2-finger port there with a little bit of a flare. Just your standard matte black vinyl wrap. And then let's pop the grill off. These grills seem like they're pretty much exactly the same as the first gen. I could be wrong, but because I never saw the first gen. These are surprisingly like good feeling speakers for the price, honestly. Like this, I don't think too many people are gonna have issues breaking the plastic pegs off of these grills, like a lot of speakers of the past. And then there's the front with the little 5-inch woofer and 1-inch soft dome and 1/4-inch soft dome super tweeter. The little plastic fascia around everything here. Not a terrible feeling little speaker for the price. Let's see if there's anything else in the box, but I'm pretty sure that's gonna be about it. I mean, I guess there's an owner's manual in here as well. Oh, and there's some like little rubber feet inside of the owner's manual, which is nice. That was one thing that blew my mind when I unboxed the Martin Logan Motion Foundation Series speakers, the fact that they didn't give you any kind of like foot or anything to stick on those speakers. That was very strange. But that's about it for the unboxing. So the Sony SSCS5 M2 here is obviously the successor to the fairly popular, especially among the cheap audio man crowd, SSCS5 version 1. Essentially, physically, it hasn't changed a lot, other than they got rid of the glossy black bit around here for the waveguide for the tweeter. But it is approximately, it's funny, it's about the same width as it is depth, but the cabinet itself, 7¼ deep, 7¼ wide. When you count the binding posts and this front fascia, it's 8¾ inch deep, and then 13¼ inch tall. Speaker weighs a good 9.5 pounds, pretty much exactly. It's 9 pounds, 8 ounces. And honestly, it is a pretty well-built speaker for the price range. And you've got a 5 1/8 inch treated paper cone woofer, and then you've got your 1 inch soft dome tweeter, and you've got it says on the website, on Sony's website, a 19 millimeter super tweeter, but I don't think that's 19 millimeters. 19 millimeters would be like 3/4 inch. I think it's more like a 9 millimeter. But that's what it says. And the crossover points, 250 hertz crossover between the woofer and the first tweeter, and then 17 kilohertz for the crossover point from the 1 inch tweeter to the, I'm just going to call it the smaller tweeter here, which is funny because that means that most of us wouldn't even be able to hear the sounds coming from the little super tweeter there, because most people, as they age, they start to lose high frequency hearing. And so most people above the age of about 30 or 35 can't even hear 17,000 hertz. So just kind of an interesting thing. But there are a lot of people that talk about the fact that those super high frequencies are where you get the spatial cues for imaging and stuff like that. And that is actually going to be kind of introducing the next point about these speakers. These things surprised me a lot because I didn't really have much experience with the first generation Sony SSCS5s, other than like seeing them at Best Buy and playing the little demo and really not being all that impressed. And honestly kind of thought that Randy, the cheap audio man, was just, I just kind of thought he might be crazy because of the fact that he liked the first generation of these speakers so much, it seemed like. So when they came out with the version 2, I was just like, oh, that gives me an excuse to actually test out these speakers. And yeah, like I said, they surprised me a lot. I expected to kind of hate them, honestly. Like, I did go into this review of these speakers with a little bit of prejudice. Like, I thought I was just gonna hate these things and I was gonna tell people don't buy these, like, buy something else. But then after listening to them for the past like week or so and then measuring them, I'm actually super impressed by what these speakers can do for a $250 pair of speakers. For one thing, they actually image fairly well. They don't give you any kind of precise layering and separation of instruments, but what they do very well is completely disappear orally in your room. So when I'm sitting in my listening position with these speakers about 8 feet apart, a foot away from the front wall, and towed in at me, they completely disappear. Like, I cannot precisely, like, I mean, other than the fact that I do obviously know where they are. Like, if I were sitting in a room where I wasn't aware of anything, if I had closed my eyes, I wouldn't be able to point at about how far out the speakers are separated in the room. So they do a very good job of disappearing, and they give you a decent center image. Like, the vocalists generally sound like they're coming from the middle of the room. So the imaging for $250 is pretty, like, higher level than what I was expecting. They're not like competing with, you know, speakers that are $3,000-$4,000 obviously, but in this kind of price range, I would say that their imaging is probably pretty similar. Actually, not just probably, it is pretty similar to something like the ELAC DB63, because that is like the cheapest speaker that I had to compare these to. So like one day when I was listening to these, I was swapping back and forth on my stands between these and the ELAC DB63s, and the imaging characteristics are pretty similar between the two. Where they are not similar, though, is in the frequency response. So these speakers, the website, I believe, says that they have bass down to 53 hertz. In my measurements, I think the 10 dB down point was about 39 hertz, which a lot of speaker companies, when they're giving you their measurements, they kind of fudge the numbers by giving you the 10 dB down point, and that's where they say the lower level frequency response is. I think Sony might be giving you the 3 dB down point, saying 53 hertz. I measured, like I said, about 38, 39 hertz, 10 dB down, and then like mid 50s, about 55 is what I was getting, I believe, at the 3 dB down point. And then it wasn't up to essentially the reference volume for the measuring until closer to 70 hertz. So if you're going to be using these in a home theater situation, I would cross them over at 80 hertz, which is pretty much the recommended crossover frequency for a home theater anyways. But then once you get past the bass, because like, yes, they are lacking in the bass. I mean, of course they are. They're 7¼ by 7¼ speakers with a 5-inch woofer. You're not going to get a lot of bass out of these. But once you get past the bass region, from about 200 hertz to 2000 hertz, they stay pretty close to the reference line. I'll put the graphs up now. And you can see, like I'm talking about, they're pretty lacking in the bass up to about 70 hertz. But then from 200 hertz to 2000 hertz, they stay fairly close. There's a few peaks and dips, but nothing more than about 2.5 decibels. And then once you're past 2000 hertz, there is a slight roll off in the upper frequency. And then once they get to 10, 12,000 hertz, they start to gradually roll off. Actually a pretty respectable frequency response. But the biggest thing that surprised me when testing these, because in those graphs, I measured 75, 85, and 95 decibels from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. And that was with the microphone sitting in my listening position. And basically, I have tested a lot of speakers doing that exact same thing. And at 95 decibels, most speakers, other than towers or some very beefy bookshelves that I have tested, they do make some, I'm going to call them uncomfortable noises when the frequency response sweep first starts. So the lower, like the very low frequencies, for around 20 hertz to maybe 50 or 60 hertz, usually with most speakers when I'm testing them, especially at that 95 dB level, the woofer makes some noises that is concerning and makes you think that you're going to damage your speakers. Then once you get out of the bass range, most speakers can handle the mid-range and upper frequencies fine without, any issues. These, surprisingly, at 95 decibels, there was no sign of strain or distortion or any kind of misbehavior from these little 5¼ inch woofers here. I was expecting and honestly slightly worried and I didn't think it was impossible that the 95 dB frequency response sweep would blow out these speakers, because I was powering them when I was doing the measuring with the Macintosh MC462. Yes, I know, I'm crazy. I hooked $250 speakers up to an $11,000 power amplifier, but that is what I have in my room or in my living room here when I am testing things. I did listen to them on the directly connected to the AV receiver in the rack here, which is the Marantz Cinema 30, which is also obviously massively overpriced in comparison to these speakers. And then I also listened to them with the Denon AVRX 3500H, which I feel like is a lot more in line with what most people are going to be using these kind of speakers with. But the fact that I was able to play these speakers from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz at 95 dB reference volume, and there was not a single sign of strain or distortion or anything like that was kind of amazing to me, because I've tested much more expensive bookshelves than these. Like, I believe when I tested the, I want to say the KEF-Q Concerto Metas, they were making some pretty, like I said, uncomfortable sounds in the extremely low frequencies when I was doing the 95 dB sweep. I think the Focal Vestia number ones also, when I did the 95 dB sweep, sounded like they were not too happy about performing that low of a frequency sweep. These just, it seemed like they didn't care at all. Most likely, I think that is most likely because of the fact that Sony, in the crossover for these speakers, they probably actually have like a first order crossover, so a 6 dB per octave roll off that essentially rolls off anything below a certain point. They probably, like, starting at 60 or 70 hertz, roll the speaker off so that it can protect the woofer and you won't damage the woofer if you do, you know, play too high of a volume at too low of a frequency where it could damage the speaker. So it's not necessarily because this is a better speaker than those, and obviously it's not. Like, the Focals and the KEFs that I'm talking about are better in essentially every way, other than the fact that, like, it really seems like Sony designed this speaker to be able to play loud without distortion or any problems at all. So if you're planning to use these in like a super budget home theater setup, they're going to be a great speaker for that, because you really don't have to worry about them misbehaving and, you know, making those sounds like the woofer is not too happy with the frequencies that you're trying to make it play. So that is actually a pretty huge bonus. Like, you could, for $500, you could have your left and right and your two surround speakers, and then they make a center channel that kind of matches these. Actually, that's one of my gripes with this series, is the fact that for some reason the center channel doesn't have the little super tweeter, so it doesn't really match these perfectly. Like, I don't get why they wouldn't put the two woofers on the sides and then the little super tweeter and then the main tweeter underneath it and make it a three-way center channel. But that's not a knock against these speakers. That's a knock against, I don't know why Sony designed the center channel to be not a perfect match for the bookshelves. But yeah, if you're looking for a really cheap home theater setup, like, you could, you know, buy a cheap 5.1 AVR and two pairs of these in the matching center and a cheap subwoofer and get up and running for, like, you know, maybe $1,500 all in. So yeah, these are pretty fantastic speakers for the $250 price point. Comparisons, I haven't really listened to anything else as cheap as these. Not like in my own space on my own electronics, but like the Polk XT20 is the first one that comes to my mind. I have a feeling that speaker probably makes a lot more bass because it's a larger bookshelf with a 6.5-inch woofer. I have a very strong feeling, though, that if I did the same frequency response sweeps that I did with these speakers on those 6.5-inch woofers probably would be making the uncomfortable noises that I keep referring to at the super low frequencies and high SPL levels. But I haven't personally listened to those speakers, so I can't say for sure anything other than, like, I assume that those things make quite a bit more bass because they have a much bigger cabinet and a 6.5-inch woofer. Another comparably priced speaker would be the Klipsch R51M. Again, that's one that I haven't heard before, but if I had to guess, I would say that their dispersion is not going to be quite as wide as the Sonys here, so they're probably not going to image quite as well. They're not going to disappear orally into the room. They're going to have a more forward sound, but it's going to just be like, for the most part, when I listen to most Klipsch speakers, they seem like a beam straight at your face of sound. They don't disappear as well as speakers that have a dome mounted on the front baffle like these speakers do. So I think if I were to hear those speakers, I would probably prefer these, but again, I haven't heard those speakers, so I can't say for sure. So if you are shopping for a pair of speakers for that $250 price point, or these things, at least the last generation of the SSCS5s here, regularly went on sale for like 120 or 150 bucks. Hopefully these will do the same thing occasionally. And if you're just looking for a really cheap pair of speakers that you want to throw somewhere, I would definitely give these things a recommendation. They, like I said, I went into this review thinking that I was not going to like them at all, and they surprised me a lot. They sound pretty well. Like I expected to set these things up on my stands, listen to them for a little while, and then not be able to stand it. And when I'm like out of reviewing audio mode and going back to wanting to listen to good quality music or playing movies or video games on my surround sound system here, I thought I was going to be swapping back and forth between these and my Canton Towers just repeatedly. But I've just left these hooked up in my living room for the past week, and I did not hate them. That completely boggled my mind. I thought I was going to hate these speakers, but it turns out that they are pretty decent. So that's the conclusion to this video. And if you like long rambly reviews about speakers like this, completely unscripted, me just talking off the top of my head about what I think about a product that I'm listening to, make sure that you like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.